welcome to WMI. We're glad to have you all. But we're also having another lecture on Thursday evening. Peggy Taylor is doing craftsmanship excellence past and present, and that is also at 6:30. So if you happen to go to the string quartet that's next door that night, slip on over here and come to our lecture. We'd be glad to have you. And also we have snacks and drinks on the table. Feel free to help yourself. And I think I'll let Deb take it from here.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm going to really try my best to make this work. It's kind of jimmy-rigged up, and I'm not used to speaking in a mic. This is the second time I've ever spoken into a mic, so just bear with me. I just want to thank just a few people, where is that thing? A few people really quickly. Pam, would you stand up, please? Pam Robinson. Okay, Pam Robinson wrote a beautiful story about me and about this program for the newspaper, and it hit the cutting room floor because of the wonderful bench dedication ceremony down on the, on the courthouse lawn. But the story was great, and I appreciate the effort that you put into it, Pam. That was really, really nice. And also Jim Stinson. Jim Stinson, will you just raise your hand? Okay, you're in. Okay, Jim really encouraged me to do this program a few years ago. He said, you really should give a program and read stories from your book. And I went, no, I don't know, Jim, I don't know. Okay, I'm here. Thank you, Jim. Okay. Okay, and Ryan, Ryan gets a thank you. Thank you, Ryan. He's not here. But that was really great to allow him to have me do this. Amy, oh my gosh, Amy Rich for my writing group in Evansville. My gosh. Okay, hi, Amy. Emily, and she is the director of Patchwork Central. She works her tail off, and I can't believe she drove all the way to New Harmony after work. Okay, thanks, Amy, for making the effort. Emily Taylor, are you here? Emily Taylor. Okay, Emily is a new friend. She's my New Harmony friend. She teaches feature writing and journalism at Vincennes University, lives here in New Harmony, and is going to be using the YouTube video for her feature writing class. So anyway, I'm glad to see your face in the audience. And here's my husband, Mike. We have a 56-year anniversary coming up in November 25th, 56 years. Yeah, really. Okay, I'm going to read the introduction to my book now. And again, if the people in the back, if I wander away from the microphone, please just wave at me, okay? Thank you. Okay. This is the introduction to my book, Posey People. And there's the book. It's out of print. It was self-published in 1999. And it sold out almost immediately. And people still ask about it and want me to reprint it. So, all right, on an August morning in 1988, a classified ad in the Mount Vernon Democrat caught my eye. Wanted, New Harmony correspondent, feature writing and general reporting. Coverage of some night meetings required, writing experience preferred. I scrutinized the small square of copy and started to turn the page, but didn't. I was out of work. 3 months before, I'd officially closed the doors of my Montessori school. A teacher for 10 years, I longed to once again be busy working with people, contributing to the community, and using my talents. I missed the feeling of connection teaching had given me. I remember looking at the ad and wondering, could I do it? Could I teach myself to write while on the job? Get all kinds of people to tell me their stories? I thought I could, and apparently editor Tim Rutherford thought I could too. He hired me and assigned me to report on 4 monthly meetings, but otherwise he turned me loose to write. A few weeks later, he made New Harmony my beat. My modest writing career was officially launched. From the beginning, I realized I had a great deal to learn. But what I lacked in skill, I made up for with earnestness. My most important strength, I felt, was my abiding love for people. I decided to trust that and let it show me the way. 10 years into this writing career, it has never let me down. For a decade, interviews and conversations with Posey County people have fed my soul and been endlessly interesting to me. This task of writing has taken me into homes, schools, cemeteries, meetings, and some very unusual workplaces. Formerly a teacher, I found I'd become a student, not only of punctuation and writing style, but of the human heart. Nearly all of the Posey Countyans I've interviewed have been remarkably open with me. They've shared their stories, opinions, memories, histories, and talked to me very candidly. They've told me honestly what they think and fear and who they love and why. They shared how things have changed over the years and what they've learned along the way. And I, who came to Mount Vernon in 1978 after a lifetime of moving about, have savored their sense of place, of groundedness and permanence. I come to think of myself as one of them, and this county as my home. This book is for them, for all Posey County people. Most of the articles in it are reprints of the Posey People columns that appeared in the Posey County News from 1999 to 1996. The other writings appeared in the Mount Vernon Democrat prior to 1993. The original publication date appears at the top of each article. Some have been edited for clarity or length. Because some of the information has changed since first written, each article ends with an update. I hope this book imparts a sense of the love and reverence I feel when people open up to me. For the truth is that the work I do is simply a means to learn from them, and in every respect, these Posey people have been my teachers about life. And that was written in April of 1999. Okay, now I'm going to read, the first story I'm going to read is the Saturday Night Dance. Okay, and this was an article that didn't appear in the book, but it did appear in the Posey County News, or which paper was it? Mount Vernon Democrat, December 12, 1990. Mention of the Saturday Night Dance brings floods of memories, and that is the headline. Above Owens Market on Main Street in New Harmony is the Oddfellows Hall, is the old Oddfellows Hall. Its boarded up windows give the place a desolate look, but 45 or 50 years ago, the old brick building was hardly deserted. It was the scene of the Saturday Night Dance, a rump and stomp and wild and crazy affair for teens from all over the county. Now, the Owens Oddfellows Hall is what's above Capers, what's now Capers, okay? And that's the location of the Saturday Night Dance. Today, those former teens are in their 50s and 60s. They're paunchy, bejowled, and gray-haired. Most are grandparents enjoying their middle-aged or, older years. Last week, I talked to a few about being teenagers during the 40s. When I mentioned the Saturday Night Dance, their reactions were all the same. First, they grinned from ear to ear and then giggled like school kids, and then the memories would flow. Kids would climb the steep steps from the street to the Oddfellows Hall, and for 35 cents, they'd jitterbug the night away to the sounds of the Jimmy Cox Orchestra. There was standing room only on those long ago nights. Benches lined the walls under the tall open windows, but who wanted to sit anyway? Kids came from miles around to strut their stuff, and some of their footwork was pretty fancy. It was a sweet, innocent time, not like today. Those I talked to all said, well, you wouldn't know the town back then. You wouldn't know the town back then, said Eddie Johnson, a drummer in the Eddie Cox Orchestra and still a resident of New Harmony. He still remembers those Saturday nights when farm families came to town to sell their butter and eggs and to shop for groceries. There were so many people in town you could hardly walk down the sidewalk, he recalls. Kids would go to the picture show for 35 cents, and then at 9 p.m., when the show got out, they danced to the Jimmy Cox Band. People would bring their cars downtown and park them early in the day, and then they'd have a prime spot to see all the action later in the evening. The women would sit in the cars and gossip, and the men would go on in the taverns. They might want to get a bite to eat at one of the restaurants, or they might want to get a bite to eat at one of the restaurants in town. When the dance got out, they'd take their kids home, he said. One of a number of people who played with the Jimmy Cox Orchestra over the years, Eddie recalls the names of some of the others. Well, there was Jim Cox on the trumpet and Mary Cox on the piano, he said. Potter Cox and George Rapp played the sax. Jim's younger brother Ray played the drums for a while too, and there were others who came and went. Nearly everyone remembers old Mr. Raymond Cox, Jim's dad, who took tickets and stamped hands as the kids entered the upstairs dance hall. He did not put up with any foolishness, Vera Johnson told me. A New Harmony resident, Vera attended Poseyville High School during the 40s. Mr. Raymond Cox was definitely in control of things, she said. Well, I can just hear him now. Now, boys, you cut that out. And at the first sign of trouble, he would kick kids out. Nobody wanted to have to leave the Saturday night dance. A grandmother of 4, Vera's fondest memory is when Jim Cox would burst out playing one of the high school songs. If that was your school, you'd leave your date and you'd get out there on the dance floor. You'd dance in a circle with all your friends and clap your hands. A lot of good-natured school rivalry went on, she recalled. You know, you'd rather die than miss the Saturday night dance, she said. It was a good place to be. If I had a date in Evansville, my mind would be on the Saturday night dance in New Harmony. I'd be wondering who was with who and who was wearing what. For Don Winderoth, who lives in Wadesville, looking back brings break time to mind. Well, the band would stop playing from 10:30 p.m. to 11 p.m., and that's when people went out to neck. Yeah, I enjoyed that break. After all that dancing, you really needed a rest. Don agrees that the weekly dance was absolutely not to be missed. I remember being in Bloomington one time with a bunch of guys at a state basketball semifinal playoff, and when it was over, we drove like crazy to make it back to the Saturday night dance. Most people I talked to said any mischief that went on was pretty minor. Ivan Alsop of New Harmony told me the boys used an outdoor toilet in the back alley behind Squeak Owen's Tavern, but you know what they were doing. They'd go back there and smoke. Ivan swears you can tell today who the regulars were at the Saturday night dance. Well, you can spot them by the way they dance, and let me tell you, those kids were good. Everyone agrees that the band members were very talented and the music was outstanding. Well, I can just see Jim Cox now raring back with that horn in the air, Vera Johnson reminisced. He'd play Honey, Stardust, String of Pearls, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. It was Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey music. Jenny Andre of New Harmony calls it dream music. Well, it was the stuff that dreams are made of, she told me. To this day, when I hear big band music, I remember the Saturday night dance. That was my era. Jenny met her husband, Ray, at the Saturday night dance, but that's another story. She said she always had to be home before the dance ended. Ray would take her home in his brand new 1947 Chevy, and then he would go back to the dance and load up his car with the Griffin girls needing a ride home. People have different opinions about when and why the Saturday night dance died out in the 50s. Mary Cox said the dances stopped for good in 1952 when she and Jim's daughter Debbie was born, but the attendance had been tapering off before that. The regulars speculated that over the years, kids became more sophisticated. They had cars and they had money to spend in Evansville, and also the picture show in town closed. The end of the Saturday night dance marked the end of a golden era in New Harmony. Ivan Alsop looked a bit sad when he thought about it. Yeah, he said, kids today just don't know what they're missing. All right, I love that story. That's just such a keeper, isn't it? It's great. Okay, now to the book. All right, let's see. I'm sorry.
Melissa, were you too young to go?
I'm the only one here, I think.
Oh, who are you, Vera? Oh, Ann Scarifier. Did you go to the Saturday night dance? Oh my God, okay. Well, let's just give Ann a hand, okay? I should have asked who here went to the Saturday night dance.
Well, one thing you didn't mention, that they played Sugar Blues once every evening, and that let all the guys in the orchestra who were, Jimmy Cox played it by himself. So if you were dating a guy, which I was, the only dance you got was when Jimmy played the Sugar Blues, because he let all the other guys go out and dance.
Okay. All right, thank you for sharing, okay? And who knew? I should have interviewed you for the story and didn't. Okay, let's see. And the story number 2, let me find it.
What years were the dancing?
Well, I graduated in '53, and I didn't remember that it ended before.
Oh, dear.
So she said it
Don
ended
Blair.
Yeah.
Okay, are you guys ready for Don Blair? All right, Don Blair. Now, I wrote, there are 3 river stories in the book. They have to do with the rivers. The river in Mount Vernon, the Ohio, of course, and then the Wabash in New Harmony. These are characters associated with the rivers and events associated with the rivers. I read this story when I gave this same program for the Posey County Historical Society, but I hope you all won't be bored with it. It's a love story, and it's a good one. And it's very surprising, too. The title of the story is Don Blair, Lucky to Have Known True Love. Did you hear that Don Blair died? A friend asked me last week. His words caught me by surprise, as words announcing death always do. Don Blair gone? Impossible. The man was an institution in New Harmony. No, I answered softly, I hadn't heard. How sad. He was a fine man, a real gentleman. I tried to remember when I'd last seen Don. It had to have been months ago. Perhaps walking out of the post office on Church Street or driving down Main Street in his brown El Camino. Memories of him about town seem to all run together. Why, he's as much a part of the New Harmony scene as red pickup trucks or kids on bikes or Joe Wilson sweeping the sidewalk in front of his corner store. Someone said Don had been ill for quite some time before he died, afflicted with the cruel deterioration that comes with advancing old age. Death came for him at 83. I remembered him as a tall, quiet man, someone who had probably been very attractive in his prime. His mannerisms were extremely courteous and genteel. He was gracious and very Southern. I recalled how I first met Don. At the time, I was writing a story about the webbed palisades along the Wabash riverbanks on the north edge of New Harmony. They'd been put there by a Houston firm to stop a serious erosion problem. Questions had been raised about their effectiveness. Talk to Don Blair in New Harmony about what he thinks, my editor had told me. Nobody knows more about that stretch of the river than he does. The events of that rainy October day in 1989 are etched clearly in my mind. As often happens with my work, what began as a routine interview ended with a revelation of the heart and one of life's little lessons about the power of love. I met Don early that misty morning at his office, located at the foot of the White County, Illinois, New Harmony, Indiana Bridge. As superintendent of the White County Bridge Commission in New Harmony, he had watched the shifting currents and changing bends of the river for a good 50 years. I was charmed by the way Don tipped his hat to me and bowed slightly. He had a lovely Southern accent, and he called me ma'am. I'd heard he could be moody and cantankerous, so I wasn't surprised when he complained bitterly about the poor design of the river jetties. Oh, they're nothing but junk, he grumped. Those Texas executives are going to tell you those palisades are working, but I'm here to tell you they're not. Most of them were taken out by the first big tree dragged along the river bottom by high water. We walked out to his car to ride down to the river for a closer look. Before we could pile in, he had to remove an assortment of junk from his dusty front seat. We drove down Coxey's Lane and stopped at the old bridge that spanned Gresham Creek. To my delight, Don opened my car door for me and offered me his arm. From the bridge, we walked to the bluff overlooking the river. Facing east, Don pointed out a ragged line of jetties that jutted perpendicular to the riverbank. Several were leaning or missing. I took pages of notes as he described how the sandbar on the Illinois side of the river looked 5 decades ago compared with how it looked on that day. Back at his gritty, cluttered office, he unrolled huge aerial maps showing New Harmony's location on the shifting river. He seemed determined to make sure I fully understood what I would be writing about. A family photo on a shelf caught my eye, and I asked who the beautiful woman in the picture was. He was silent for a moment. "That's Betty," he said quietly, wiping dust from the picture glass. "She's gone now." A moment of silence passed, and he took me by complete surprise by launching into lines from Shakespeare. Was I hearing right, or had one of us lost our mind? "Fie upon thee, thou foul wretch!" He said he belted out very dramatically. "That's what I used to call her. That's what I used to call her. The wretch. I called her that for years. It's from Shakespeare. When I first heard that line, I thought it was the most euphonious thing I had ever heard. It just suited her. She was quite a woman. I sure do miss her." I nodded like I understood, but I didn't. Come on, let's go for a ride," he said. "Let's go visit Betty." Again, I slid onto the gritty seat of his brown El Camino, and he drove me through town to Maple Hill Cemetery. A light rain was falling. We parked at the top of the hill, and we waited in the car for the rain to let up. Don seemed to want to talk, so I sat and I listened. "Oh, she was the most wonderful person," he told me with pain in his eyes. "A beautiful lady. I knew the minute I saw her that she was the one I'd marry. There was never a doubt in my mind that she would be my wife. Never a doubt." And sure enough, we were married for 44 years. He talked for a while about their life together and told me he had been a happy man. He said they had 2 daughters, Judy and Jean, and that it broke his heart when Betty died in 1980. The rain stopped falling, and Don got out of the car, walked around the front of the vehicle, and opened my door for me. He offered me his arm, and together we walked down the slippery slope to Betty's grave. Betty Hooks Blair, the granite stone read. Don knelt down, reached out, and traced her name with his finger. "Oh my God, I miss her so much. I wish I could be with her," he said. His shoulders bowed with grief. He began to weep softly. Aware that this was a lucky man who had known true love in his lifetime, I did the only thing I could think of to do. I reached over and I squeezed his hand. And that's the end of the article. Don Blair died on July 30th in 1992, and he's buried in Maple Hill Cemetery next to his beloved wife, Betty. Okay, that's Don Blair. Quite a character. Okay, let's see. Okay, number 4. This is another river story, okay? And this one is about a woman in Mount Vernon. She's passed away. Agnes McFadden. So let me find Agnes. And Agnes had an incredible story to tell about the 37 flood. The 37 flood, 1937. Agnes McFadden, Angel of Mercy. This appeared in the paper on August of 1993. Most people have a hard time imagining the terrible devastation of that a massive flood can cause. They've never had waist-high mud in their living room or torrents of water lapping at their roof. Agnes McFadden can imagine. The harrowing television scenes of recent flooding in the nation have brought back plenty of memories for this Mount Vernon resident. In 1937, she was a 26-year-old relief volunteer caring for victims of the overflowing Ohio River. At 82, she remembers those events well, how the weather turned nasty right after the Christmas holidays, and how for 8 weeks the region was pelted with rain, sleet, and snow. It was so cold, she recalls. The river kept rising, and people kept moving to higher ground as their homes became flooded. Boats were set out to bring them into Mount Vernon for safety. We turned out to be the highest point between Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cairo, Illinois. It could be Cairo, I'm not sure. Agnes remembers how, as the weather worsened and the waters rose, and the endless stream of refugees poured into the city. While some people were able to stay with relatives, others had no place to go. Many were ill with flu or pneumonia from exposure to the elements. We were getting people not only from the county, but from Illinois and Kentucky too, she said. It was pretty obvious pretty quickly that we had a major crisis on our hands. Our 3 local doctors couldn't handle that many sick people scattered all over town, and it was clear that we needed a central location for them to come to. Agnes was the young mother of a 4-year-old daughter at the time, but she volunteered to help care for the ill. The Memorial Coliseum on East 3rd Street was opened up as an emergency hospital and relief headquarters. For the next few weeks, Agnes worked practically around the clock, stopping only to snatch a little sleep or to go home to clean up. My mother-in-law, Florence McFadden, babysat for my little girl and for Bill Cox, who was 6 years old at the time. There at home, my own basement was filled with water. We had to use the fireplace for heat, she said. My husband, John, was assistant deputy sheriff at the time, so he had his work cut out for him too. For those few weeks, we saw very little of each other. As part of a team of doctors, nurses, and volunteers, Agnes helped transform the Coliseum into a functioning hospital and relief center. Well, people with no place to go slept on the 2nd floor. The huge main room on the first floor was used to care for the ill and injured. It was something I'll never forget, Agnes said. Boats were bringing people in from all over and letting them out at the end of Main Street. That was as high as the river got in Mount Vernon. The temperature was bitter cold and it just kept raining and sleeting. Animals of all kinds were running loose everywhere in the streets, not just dogs and cats, but livestock and chickens too. They'd bring them in on the boats and then just let them loose, she said. At one point, the waterworks went out and we were able to get well water from the ice company in town. Somebody got on the phone and called around for blankets, bedpans, quilts, and cots. People brought in all kinds of donated items to the Coliseum and volunteers sorted it out. Agnes said she was not new to relief work at the time. Once, she had gone out in a boat to help rescue a mother and a new baby from a low-lying flooded area. Her boat had glided over the tops of fences, but she had never seen the results of widespread flooding like this. A barge landed at the foot of Main Street with 65 people from Shawneetown, she said. They had been exposed to the elements for 2 days and hadn't had any food. Their clothing was solid sheets of ice. A lot of them were sick. Agnes said the Coliseum Hospital accommodated 60 to 70 patients. Volunteers strung a wall of sheets down the center of the huge room, and men were cared for on one side and women on the other. Virginia Floyd of Point Township gave birth to a baby boy there in the hospital area. She named him William Anthony after the doctor who delivered him. I got doctor, so maybe it was 2 names after 2 doctors, Agnes said. When it became clear one patient needed an emergency appendectomy, Agnes rode to Evansville in a military vehicle to bring back surgical supplies. Water was up to our running board, she said. We were the last truck to get through for supplies before high water cut us off from Evansville. She said there was a great fear of typhoid and that 2,000 people were immunized against the dreaded disease. One patient with scarlet fever was isolated and cared for in a little dressing room off the Coliseum stage. Several children with measles and whooping cough were also separated from the others. Someone cared for an infant separated from its family until its frantic parents could be found. Dorothy Wildbrenner set up a kitchen in the Coliseum basement, and it ran serving 3 meals a day. Sigico donated a stove and hooked it up for us. I remember making baby formula and boiling water to sterilize syringes for reuse. We made do with what we had, Agnes said. She remembers that on January 21st, exhausted volunteers got help from the National Red Cross, which sent boats loaded with supplies and personnel. Local doctors W.B. Chalman, J.R. Raines, Frank Oliphant, and William Jenkinson were given relief by Dr. Anthony Bryan of Indianapolis. On February 1st, the river crested at 59.25 feet. It was reported to be 25 miles wide at Mount Vernon, stretching out like a vast sea from the town's riverfront. After that, the water slowly receded. The Coliseum's emergency hospital officially closed on February 19th, and there 2,750 flood refugees had been given aid thanks to local and national Red Cross workers and countless volunteers. Now a retired registered nurse, Agnes said her heart goes out to the many victims of recent flooding. Their lives are devastated, but the worst is yet to come. The high water was batting up, but now they have to clean up the mess and try to rebuild their lives. When the water goes down, they'll have to deal with tons of mud in their homes, raw sewage, dead animals, garbage, snakes, and rats. It is just unimaginable, she said. Those people need all the help they can get. There's just no way the Red Cross will be able to help them all. Agnes knows how the Red Cross will try to help in whatever ways it can. The organization is dedicated to providing practical help when people need it most. A dedicated Red Cross volunteer, Agnes received a 50-year pin in 1992 for her half-century of service. When Posey County people need assistance, they get it from their own, she said. During the 1937 flood, all we had to do was say we needed something, and somebody got it for us. And then I have here at the end of the story, Agnes and her husband John retired to Solar Point in February of 1995. He passed away 5 months later, and that's the end of the story on Agnes. So, thank you. All right, now, okay, so do you all know what gummy bears are? Or gummies, gummy worms, gummy bears? Okay, now you know how they go, and you can stretch them like that. Okay, so this story is about shoes. And these shoes are made of rubber, the texture of gummy bears, the flexibility of gummy bears with a kind of a petroleum odor to them, okay? So here we go. Neva Don Carlos. Does anybody remember Neva Don? And hands pop up, okay.
Yeah, what a character.
What a character indeed, and my privilege to meet her. And such a deadpan, I've never met anyone with such a deadpan sense of humor. She could tell the most hysterically funny stuff with the most straight face, Okay, Neva Don Carlos, a lot like pancakes. Oh, she's about that tall, maybe about that tall, okay. I talked to Neva Don Carlos the other day about her 900 pairs of Sandak polyvinyl shoes, and I ended up learning a thing or two about pancakes, sales techniques, and human endurance in the course of our 2-hour conversation. Chatting with Neva is a lot like jumping on a trampoline. Half the time, your feet are in contact with the mat. The rest of the time, it's high flying. It's strictly high flying. I had heard tales of Neva's 900 pairs of Sandak polyvinyl shoes from different people in New Harmony, and I thought I would like to see them for myself. I wasn't disappointed. They're over at her late Auntie Grace's house on Steam Mill Street, an awesome display, arranged more or less by size in the living room. Though brand new, none are in boxes. For those who may be thinking Neva is New Harmony's version of Imelda Marcos, you are wrong. She was left with the shoes when her beloved Auntie Grace passed away last May. She's been selling a few here, a few there ever since, and she's anxious to sell a few more. You know, dealing with these shoes wouldn't be such a burden if I had more energy, she said. But I'm moving slow from that hard fall I took last April. She was referring to a freak accident that for a time left her incapacitated with a broken pelvis and severe pain. Several months before, her mother, Louise, had slipped on the sidewalk and landed on her chin, severely damaging the hinges of her jaw. Auntie Grace had moved to New Harmony from Illinois to help Neva take care of Louise, but she died just 4 short weeks after Neva's fall. Neva's thin face and expressive eyes speak volumes of what the women in her family have been through in the past 2 years. Somehow she's managed to look on the bright side of things, pleased she's feeling better, and can finally get around without her walker. Without a doubt, her very gentle, dry sense of humor is still intact. So tell me about these shoes, I told her when she took me over to see them. I looked at the piles and piles and piles and just shook my head. The scene looked surreal, like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. I fully expected the Cat in the Hat to come walking through the room at any minute. Well, I think they're having babies, Neva said with a straight face. In fact, I'm sure of it. Actually, these shoes are a lot like pancakes. She launched into a joke about a lady who went to a psychiatrist and complained that people thought she was crazy because she liked pancakes so much. The psychiatrist said he didn't think she was crazy, that liking pancakes was perfectly normal. Well, the lady said, you must come and see me sometime. I've got trunks and trunks of them. Boy, said Neva, that's exactly how I feel. So why did Auntie Grace bring all these shoes with her when she came to New Harmony? Neva told me she and Auntie Grace had both been shoe dealers several years before. She got out of the shoe business eventually, but Auntie Grace stayed in. Oh, Auntie Grace was a marvel, Neva said. She was a born saleswoman. She could sell absolutely anything to absolutely anybody. I learned a lot just watching her. She's where I got my street knowledge. One time, Neva continued, we were both living out in Los Angeles. We had rented a booth at an outdoor movie theater flea market. Here comes this man. Well, you could tell he probably never owned a car in his life and probably never would, but would you believe it? Auntie Grace sold him some car wax. I am telling you, she was a wonder. I just marveled at her. Neva said she had no idea her aunt had brought so many pairs of shoes to New Harmony with her until she died. She brought them in the moving van and put them in all kinds of places in the house, Neva said. She had stored them in the closets, in the bedrooms, in the closets in the halls. She even stuffed them in the linen closet in the bathroom. They were everywhere. I'm telling you, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was just overwhelmed. I never did figure out why she took them out of the boxes. Neva told about a shoe party she had in August. It was an unplanned event where she ended up being the hostess. It was late at night, and I had just taken a muscle relaxer, and I was getting ready to go to bed. There was a knock at the door, and I heard someone say, "We're here." Well, wouldn't you know it, it was the kids from the class of 53, some New Harmony kids I'd graduated with, and I said to them, am I having a party? And Donna Creek said, "Neva, we have come to buy your shoes." Well, we just had the best time. I didn't have any refreshments to give them, but would you believe I sold 4 pairs of turquoise shoes. One girl wanted to see how her feet looked with the shoes on, so one of the boys held her up to the bathroom mirror. The whole evening was like that. Well, I told them the shoes had a 5-year guarantee, but I said I bet the shoes would still be around when they were gone, after they were gone. And they said to me, "Neva, when we die, we want to be buried with our new shoes on." I'm sorry. When they were leaving, Angie Elder Mason from California stepped off the porch into a puddle of water and said, "Oh no, I just got my new shoes wet." And I told her, "No problem, Angie, water won't hurt these. They're made of polyvinyl. I just take the hose to mine." Maybe a newspaper story about the 900 pairs of shoes would help you spread the word that you've got these for sale, I offered. "Wouldn't that be wonderful," Neva said, "but would you just do me one favor? Would you please be sure and tell people how comfortable they are?" So that's Neva Don Carlos, okay. And the story ends with me saying that Neva recently donated 100 pairs of shoes to an orphanage in Honduras, but she still has lots and lots to sell.
Were they crocs?
No, they're like, just pictured gummy worms. They were just like rubber shoes that you could stretch them out. Yeah. So, and I don't remember any color but black and turquoise. Black, turquoise. That's just my memory of the colors. There may have been other colors, but they just seem like they're all black and turquoise. Okay, so let's see. Neva Don Carlos. Okay, Alan Cook. You know Alan Cook. You all, surely many of you remember Alan Cook. Raise your hand if you do. Okay. I wanted to include a story about a veteran, one of New Harmony's veterans, because, you know, it's Veterans Day next week. I debated about including this because it's really some hard things to hear, but I think it's important, and I was just so honored to interview Alan Cook. He's gone now. So let me turn to page 14, and we're going to read about Alan Cook. Just a moment, let me find it. Let's see. Okay, Alan Cook. The subline in this story is haunted by a face. Haunted by a face. At first, Alan Cook's military discharge papers from World War II are not particularly impressive. They show that, like countless others, he was a private first class who served as a military policeman in the Army. Before his 3-year stint began, this New Harmony resident had been a 21-year-old construction laborer working for his father. His background was ordinary enough. It is line 32 of his discharge papers that catches the eye, the list of war campaigns he served in Normandy, Northern France, Ardennes, the Rhinelands, and Central Europe, the list reads. Clearly, Alan saw a lot of action during World War II. Today, he has many memories of those war-torn years. Some are touching, some are funny, and others caused his eyes to mist. Some have haunted him for 47 years. His brief military career began on August 19, 1942, when he was tapped by the local draft board official to be the first from New Harmony to go. My father and the head of the draft board were business competitors, he recalled, so it came as no surprise to me when I was drafted first. Alan took his basic training at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, and there, as a military policeman, he let New Harmony buddies, Herb Endicott and Morris Anderson, sneak out the main gate from time to time, and sometimes sneaked out with him. Alan laughed and complained that he was ill-equipped for the job of MP. I was much better at being a civilian, he claimed. At Camp Miles Standish near Boston, he received intensive training in the art of handling prisoners. On April 13, 1944, he shipped out from Boston as an escort guard in Company 437th MPEG. He and thousands of others sailed on the USS Wakefield, a luxury liner pressed into military service. For 5 days, the unescorted liner plowed through rough seas, zigzagging to evade German submarines. The ship was headed for Liverpool, England. There were 12,000 to 14,000 men on board, Alan recalled. For 5 days, we stood in a moving line to eat our 2 meals a day. A lot of the men got very seasick. One of Alan's most vivid memories is of June 10, 1944, when his company crossed the English Channel and landed at Utah Beach on the Normandy coast in France. 4 days earlier, on D-Day, the first wave of thousands of the infantry had landed and engaged in fierce fighting there. He remembered the devastation that littered the beach when he arrived. It was a mess, he said. Sinking ships, bodies in the water and on the sand, carnage everywhere. Our job was to direct the movement of supplies and materials and vehicles, as well as to move men, tanks, food, and medical personnel. There was incredible chaos, he said. We never really knew what we were supposed to do. The right hand did not know what the left hand was doing. All we could do was hope things were going well. Sometime after landing, the men in Alan's company trekked 4 hours inland as a part of a huge movement of troops. And that night, the Germans had complete air superiority, and artillery fire was exchanged all around Alan and his men. At one point, Alan moved from a position in an open field to another location. 20 minutes later, the troops that had moved into that area were killed by butterfly bombing and strafing. I knew the man who was killed right where I had been sitting, Alan said. I knew him from KP duty. For the past 47 years, I have wondered why he got it and not me. Another of his memories points out the absurdity of war. During the invasion of Normandy, he pulled police duty at a house of ill repute in a village about 6 miles from where the fierce fighting was taking place. It got pretty rowdy, he remembered. The men were lined up, and some were angry because the officers were cutting in line. And all of this while fighting was going on. Allen said his job as an MP during the invasion was to move prisoners of war from near the front lines to the rear where they would be safer. But we didn't move prisoners to the rear, he explained. We just guarded them. Somebody else interrogated them. At one point, I was one of 17 guards controlling 32,000 prisoners in an open field with a single strand of barbed wire all around them. But they didn't make a break for it. There was no place for them to go. Perhaps Allen's most painful memory is of his visit to Buchenwald concentration camp about 5 days after Americans first entered it. Encouraged by his commanding officer to visit the camp, Allen and several other men in his company took a 30-mile truck trip to see the hellhole for themselves. It was horrible. It was horrible, Allen recalled, his eyes misting. There were stacks of charred bodies everywhere. The survivors were just pitiful. They were dying like fleas. We saw lampshades in the Nazi commander's office made from tattooed human skin. To this day, Allen is haunted by one face in particular, that of a Buchenwald prisoner who staggered up to thank him and other Americans for his freedom. I think he was Hungarian, Allen said. He knew a little English. He was emaciated, just skin and bones. He was crawling with lice. He was so happy to see us, so happy to be free. He just kept trying to embrace us. We stood there talking for a minute or two, and I guess the emotion, it just got too much for him. He lay down in front of us and died. Allen Cook is a retired field supervisor for the Oil and Gas Division of the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. He lives in New Harmony with his wife, Eileen, and he passed away several years ago. I wanted to include that story even though it's gruesome. I think it's important that we include a story about a vet. And how many of you did know Allen? Okay, several of you did. Oh, he was wonderful, such a wonderful man. Okay, Lauren Coxey. Does anybody remember Coxey? Okay. Philosopher in a Tar Paper Shack is the subtitle. Every town has its saints and sinners, characters and codgers. New Harmony is no exception. Ask the old-timers in town who provided local color years ago, and they will likely mention Coxey, a one-of-a-kind philosopher, atheist, and wine connoisseur, a simple, humble man. They will tell you Loren Cox was a study in contradictions. He was self-educated, well-read, and a highly intelligent man who lived a hard-scrabble existence. His lifestyle was perhaps best explained by the platitude, "Enough is as good as a feast." Coxey had food, a battered bike to get around on, friends to look out for him when he was down. He was doled out $5 a week for his tavern expenses and had a tar paper roof over his head. What more could a man want? For at least 40 years, until he died in 1975, Coxey was a familiar sight around New Harmony. He lived near the river, a quarter of a mile due north of town on land owned by Dorothy Long. His immediate neighbors were cronies Bob Fisher and Dude Burkett. Born in the Wadesville area about 1903, Coxey was a bootlegger as a young man during the Prohibition days. Pestered repeatedly by police, he was sent to jail 4 times, twice he claimed, in place of his father. Kirby Wilson is a local outdoorsman who often stopped by Coxey's shabby neighborhood to visit. He has a rich trove of stories about Coxey's life at the Wabash River's edge. Bob Fisher and Coxey were like the odd couple, Kirby recalled, chuckling. Well, it was like a marriage between the two. Bob was the straight guy, the straight man, the restraining influence. He cooked for Coxey and he kept everybody clean. Bob was sensible and logical, but Loren would win arguments because he could outtalk Bob, Kirby said. Kirby described Coxey's house as the chassis of an old threshing machine with a tar paper shack built on the wagon bed. The wheels had steel rims and the shack had a smokestack extending from its roof. It had no electricity, only a coal oil lantern. Bob lived in a nearby structure of stalls next to a donkey. Pinned coon dogs howled just outside. Bob kept a fire going and fed the others a harvest fare of vegetables, ham, and beans. Oh, they'd squabble over who got the most meat, Kirby said. Kirby remembered the overstuffed couches and chairs that sat rotting under the huge shade trees. This open-air shantytown living room was Coxey's favorite place to snooze after a trip to the local tavern. Nearby, a few pinned hogs dined on garbage scrounged from the local high school, while wandering chickens scratched up meager rations. Coxey's fishnets hung from the trees. He had an old John boat with oars and no motor. When lucky, he'd catch fish to eat and sell. He supplemented his haphazard diet with scraps from a local restaurant. Coxey helped Bob with odd farming jobs. Kirby said they would drive around in an old farmall tractor dragging an Indian-styled travois, I don't know how to pronounce it, Travois, bearing an old disc plow. I'm pretty sure the tractor had no road gear, Kirby recalled. If it did, they didn't believe in it. At Coxey's request, local businesswoman I.J. Dart helped him manage his finances by doling out a $5 a week allowance. Her sensible grip on the purse strings kept his impulsive habits in check. Guardian of his funds, he called her his Guardine. Though Coxey was a familiar sight, pushing his ancient bicycle around town, few people remember him actually riding it. On more than one occasion, Joe Wilson found where Coxey and the bike had parted ways. The spinning-wheeled bike would be toppled off by the side of the road, while Coxey could be found in the opposite ditch. "Oh, that dang bike throwed me again, Joe," a beleaguered Coxey would say. Long before the layered look was fashionable, Coxey was wearing 2 shirts and 2 pairs of overalls at the same time. Kirby recalled how he would put new clothes right on over the old ones. He often wore his overalls unbuttoned on the sides, and he liked the jaunty set of a ball cap on his head. He had been a fairly tall man in his prime, but time had reduced him in his years to a small, stooped man. Though Coxey's resources were meager in his lifestyle, humble folks recall him being in love on at least 2 occasions. Once Kirby found him picking plastic flowers off the graves in Maple Hill Cemetery. When questioned, Coxey admitted they were a gift for a certain widow woman. Another time he had a crush on a young woman from Cleveland, a Peace Corps student who had spent a summer in New Harmony. Coxey asked Geneva Hall to proofread his love letter to the college girl, and in it he professed to love her in, quote, an obliquely catty-cornered way. An avowed atheist, Coxey shared his views on the hereafter with anyone who would listen. This speculative idea of life after death upon analysis falls entirely to the ground, he would say. He died on the day after Christmas in 1975 and was buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery outside Wadesville. Baptist preacher Jim Carroll conducted the funeral service. Today, Joe Wilson can't look at the lamppost across from his store on the corner of Church and Main without picturing Coxey leaning against the lamppost to steady himself. I just wonder whatever happened to that old bike, he mused. Coxey is still remembered by New Harmony locals as one of the town's most unforgettable characters. And those are the stories. So, we have a few minutes, just a few, because I know you all are tired, for questions. Anybody got a question? Did you like it, Joni? Oh, from Joni, oh my God. Okay, well, that'll be another program in the spring, okay. Because there's lots more in here, and they're funny, and they're all kind of different. Oh, goody. Okay, anybody else got a question or even a comment? Mary Ann.
Do you have any photographs that accompany the story?
Oh, see, these photographs, this was it was so cobbled together. I did little drawings. It's got little drawings like this. I did the drawings, but the photographs are kind of not very good photographs. But that was in the olden days, okay? So we would have better ones today, but thanks for it.
Way to find old photos of.
Oh, they're out there. We know they are.
Yeah. It's they're so descriptive, you actually see a visual of them.
Yes, it would have been nice if we'd had better photographs, but maybe I should have done pen and ink drawings of the people instead of the bird feeders. Okay, anybody else?
Have you thought about doing another book of
You mean more stories?
Yeah, more stories, like if
Oh,
people
they're-
are here now, especially.
That, you know what?
Especially the old timers that are.
Why don't you take it on? How about that? No, I'm dead serious, okay? I'm old and I'm sick, okay? I've got health challenges and I'm going to turn 78 in February. And I would love to be out there interviewing these people. It was the most fun, best job I ever had in my life, but I'm just, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Just wondered if you thought about it.
Oh, I think about it all the time. I just fantasize about turning back the clock, being out there running around town, you know, but that's over with, unfortunately, sadly.
Deb, I
Jess?
just want to say thank you for bringing them back to life.
Oh, thanks, Jess.
All these characters would be very happy.
Well, they're all looking down on us. You know they are.
So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Because he doesn't believe in it. Anybody else? Okay, I think we're done. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. And I think I'm ending 5 minutes early. Am I? Is that true? Amazing. Okay. Okay, and my legs are killing me, so I've got to sit down. Okay, so thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for the kind words, Joni. And have I met you?
No.
What is your name?
I'm Gail Angel.
Hi. So happy to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you too.
Yeah. Are you live here in town?
I do. I live at Conner Church and West Street. So just
So all these cool people